for today. I'm going to present a format to allow you to increase support for a given project, program, policy, or process update. How to interactively more effectively with stakeholders, and how do you identify certain tendencies that are typical. And then at the end, hints on barriers and roadblocks when you do stakeholder management. I do that by presenting content. I love the dialogue, so please join me. I use real world present day examples. And if you have anything, I'd love contributions from the group. This slide here is my reminder to tell you that I have a handout. If you go into the link that took you here, my deck is in on that handout. And I say that because I may drop a few acronyms or terms that you may not be familiar with. And in the back of that document, I have 5 slides of definitions. If per chance there's something on there that I mentioned that's not on the definitions, feel free to ask me about it. Because if you're wondering what I mean by sphere, node, stakeholder analysis, I'm assuming somebody else will as well. All right, a couple of assumptions. Your interest is to deliver your project on time, on budget, with all the feature, with a smile on everybody's face. When implemented, projects cause change throughout an enterprise, often way downstream, right? All projects, companies, departments have politics. You can't change the way people interpret the situation or how they'll react. On every project, there are saviors, there are saboteurs, there are friends, and there are tripwires. So what do assumptions become when they're communicated, transparent, and agreed upon to all? Anybody want to throw in a suggestion on that? Put it in the chat if you would. Hang on a second while I get my chat up.
Joe, nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, what I say, a lot of people know what assumptions are. You know, when you say assume, they know what that means. Well, I say assumptions are awesome. The difference is, are they known or unknown? If you have an unknown assumption, they are what assume stands for. If you become transparent and agreed to by everybody, they become, to me, a project giver. All right, let's talk about the stakeholder grid, but beforehand, we have to have one Dilbert. Before you energize my team with your proposal, let me introduce you to everyone, is what the boss is telling. This is Wally. He'll show no reaction because he hopes apathy will kill your idea before it creates work. This is Alice. She'll leave halfway through your presentation to take a phone call. This is ASOC. He'll be enthusiastic because he doesn't understand how the real world works. This is Dilbert. He'll tell you why your idea is impossible. This is Carol. She'll spend the entire meeting wondering if that's your real hair. And this is Ted. He gave us 2 weeks notice last week. And of course, the sponsor says, and I like to keep my eyes closed the entire time because I have allergies, so go. Isn't that what often happens as you begin a project? And with that, I'd like to introduce the spheres of influence. This is a three-dimensional cube that talks about power, attitude, and interest. And it goes from 0 to high, 0 to high, 0 to high. So somebody with high attitude, high power, and high interest would be a savior. Somebody with no interest, no attitude, and no power is a tripwire. I will go through this cube in detail as we go through it, but if you ever want to check it out, this came out of Bright Hub PM, linked on the lower right corner of my slide deck. So think of terms of attitude. Are they a backer or a blocker. So a tripwire would be a blocker, but an acquaintance with attitude is a backer. So are they supportive or not? Power, influence, significance. Can they influence the project for better or worse? Again, the acquaintance has no power, the sleeping giant does. Now, think about right and might, and I'll explain that more in a second. And then interest. Do they have interest in your project? How invested are they? Are they active or are they passive? Again, the saboteur has high interest, a lot of power, and a negative attitude. So if you have this cube, you have 8 intersections, 8 outcomes. They run from negative to positive extremes with the sphere at each end, and they lead to these 8 results, these 8 spheres. Does that make sense?
Recording in progress.
Yeah. Joe, that is making sense to me. And I'm seeing in the chat, someone put in makes sense.
No, that was me. I'm trying to use a second computer as my way to see the chat. And I turned off the audio so there would be no feedback. All right, so let's go look at this. So the goal today is to understand each of these 8 spheres, and then what I call the I4. How do you influence them? How do you involve them? How do you ignore them? Or how do you isolate them? That's the goal for today. All right, so first question. Toss in the chat. Where do you spend most of your time? What spheres are most important? What would be your guess? What would be your assumption? Glenn says high influence. Thank you, Glenn. Positive attitude, sleeping giant, and savior and sleeping giant. Thank you, Marissa. Marissa, why did you pick savior and sleeping giant? Debbie says high power, high influence. I'm going to say influence and pilot power are very similar, Tyler. Hope that's okay. Who influenced all your project? High influence. All right, seems to be the general thought was where the influence and the power is. So which spheres require less attention, less concern? Irritant and tripwires, what Catherine says. Trying to get them to be positive, absolutely. So the key there is you want to spend your time on the folks that have the most power, the most influence being the same thing, because they're going to have the biggest impact on your project. The ones with less power, you don't ignore, you spend some time on them, but you have to make sure that the saviors, sleeping giants, saboteurs, all are taken care of because they can derail your project the most. So let's take a look at the different spheres in detail. Irritant, low power, low, high interest, negative attitude. I mean, the irritant title says it all. They need to be engaged so they stop eating away on your project, or what I call put them back in their box. And by that, I mean you either ignore them or you isolate them. You engage them, you convince them, you convert them, or you isolate them. You do not want them eating away at your project. Friend, on the other hand, neither has no power but interest, but a positive attitude. They should be a confidant or sounding board. If they like your project and somebody's a friend, they're somebody, even though they can't maybe push a project forward or get you resources or solve problems, they're often somebody you can talk to and find out about what's going on in their area. So if time allows, attend to them after other priorities, because even that irritant who may have a bad attitude, Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So you can't ignore them, just use time accordingly. Tripwire, low interest, low power, low interest, negative attitude. Just make sure you understand who they are so you can watch your step so you avoid tripping up. Same with the acquaintance, low power, low interest, but they have a positive attitude. They just need to be kept informed, communicated. FYI type of communications. Now, if they're low power and low interest, doesn't matter what their attitude is, they're not going to care much about your work, your effort, project you're working. On the other hand, sleeping giant has power and positive attitude, but no interest. They're influential, but they're not helping you out there. So what do? Well, they're a tremendous supportive for your project. Since they have the power and the attitude, you have to make sure they know what's in it for them. And making sure you know what's in it for them is different for each person because each of them has different benefits. So if they're the business owner or the manager of the area downstream that's being impacted, what's the benefit they're going to get? If they're a big brother, somebody that's going to double check and validate, or a gatekeeper of some sort, is there going to be an issue, or is it going to be a problem, or is this just going to go through easily? What's in it for them? You want to awaken them to the benefit of the project. So the savior has power, interest, and attitude. They are easy to work with. They love their attitude, and they've got the power to do it. So you, in your case, or this case, you do whatever is necessary to keep them on your side. You pay attention and cater to their needs. So think about sponsors, senior executives, key SMEs, domain experts. They're the folks that should be sleeping giants and saviors. They have the power, and they should have the positive attitude. Time bomb, also power, also with no interest, but has a negative attitude. They need to be understood so you can diffuse them before they go off. And unlike the tripwire who doesn't have the power, you can't ignore them or isolate them. You have to actually get them on your side. So when I say diffuse them before the bomb goes off, that's my way of saying work with them, find out what their issues are, find out what it is that they want, what would convert them from a time bomb to either a sleeping giant or a savior. Saboteur, as the name implies, they have power, they have a negative attitude, but they have the interest. They are an active blocker. They need to be engaged and converted. After taking care of your savior, the saboteur should be the number two type of person you cater to and take care of. Again, what's in it for them? Otherwise, you should be prepared to clean up after them if you cannot convert them. Saboteurs will suck the life out of a project. Make sure you deal with them effectively, either you, your sponsor, your PSME, somebody, get as many people on your side to help work through what the concerns are for the saboteur. Because if they've got the power, you have to involve or influence them. You're not going to be able to ignore or isolate. They have too much power, they'll go around them. So they should be a high priority in putting in your risk mitigation plan. If you're running a project and you've got a saboteur on it, put them in a risk mitigation plan, but just think about it. Not everybody wants their name in a risk mitigation plan or on a chart saying that they're a saboteur. So be careful how you document that. So what that leads us to is the analysis. So it's a 5-step process. You plan, you identify, you determine who fits where, you rate them, and you use it. All right, let's talk about the plan. And I love this quote from Abe Lincoln. It says, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 hours sharpening an axe. So as you're about to kick off a project, you're going to be working on requirements gathering or whatever needs to be done. I don't care if it's a process or a program or a project. You need to figure out who's on your team. So first of all, what is the scope, goals, purpose for the project you're working on? And then identify everyone to help build out the analysis. Everyone. We'll go in details to how you mean everyone, because you do still want to find the folks that are on the fringes. Okay, and that includes the potential users, and then devise a plan for using the information. What are some of the milestones that you're going to look at? What are some of the ways you're going to take the information around the sleeping giants and the saboteurs and the time bombs, and how are you going to go and use that information? And then what I like to say is assumptions are your friend, as I mentioned earlier, but make sure you identify what they are in your team. You talk through them so that if you have some false assumptions, they can be corrected. I see something from BD, difference between where you ought to spend time and where you end up in practice. Too often, the squeaky wheel gets the attention. Yes, BD, that is absolutely true. The squeaky wheel can. And if you are managing your time, you may minimize that, but they're the ones that are going to come by and catch you in your office or in your cube. They're going to be the ones that are going to come up and ask questions at the most inappropriate time. That's why you need to get those squeaky wheels and get them converted to positive, whether they have the power or not, because they can still impact things. But you still have to spend a lot of concerted, planful time on the folks with the power. Thank you for the question. Oh, thank you, Bob. Paul, you have deciding on the next session, use the attendee website. All right. Well, that'll be something I'll remind when we get to the end. So the plan, define, identify, devise, identify. So I consider it same as a project charter. It's going to have similar features. What do I mean by identify the key stakeholders? Compile a list of your stakeholders, the groups or individuals or groups affected by the project program process. Anybody and everybody. When I mean anybody and everybody, I mean anybody and everybody. Think about it. If the SME is a VP or a director or a C-level person, stakeholder also includes that person's admin assistant. If you have a software product that has to be deployed, that includes the change control board. If that includes something that might impact the security that the software people have to manage, that includes the security department. If there's an impact on people, that includes HR. You have to cast an extremely wide net. So consider both the project's activities, who's doing the work, and people that are impacted by the outcome, direct or indirect. So here's some examples: sponsors, employees, side of the project, executives, people downstream, customers, internal, external. And when I say regulatory body, or I say big brother, that's what I mean by any regulatory body, internal, external. And for those of the folks that are in the government section, keep in mind the media. You have to make sure they're a stakeholder that you want to keep an eye on. Stakeholders are in touch, find out and list the stakeholders who are constantly in touch on a daily basis. And then those individuals that turn up occasionally. So make notes of all that. All right, take a second now on the side, because we're not together and we're not in a big workshop format. I only have a little bit of time, but think of a project you're working on now. List 5 stakeholders, at least 5 individuals or group. What's their name, what's their role, a unique fact. How would you categorize them? You haven't gone through the details on how to slot them, but if you can think about where you might categorize them now, and do you have any labels that come to mind? Are they a friend? Are they a sleeping giant? Think about that. So take a second and do that, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide where you make that list. But it'll help as I go through the rest of this plan if you put some of those people in writing, and we can refer to it as we talk about it. Then next thing you want to do is you have to collect and document as much information. And the hint about collecting and documenting information as you're doing your research, do not put that in a public folder. Put it someplace where you and your project peers, your project team, can get at it without making it public to the world. Because as you're thinking about this downstream, if they're a savior or sleeping giant or an acquaintance, that's fine. But if you're going to label somebody an irritant, a tripwire, a time bomb, a saboteur. They may not like that, and so you have to be careful if that gets out. You want to influence if and when that gets out. You don't want somebody to trip on it and find out the hard way. So what you collect and document information. I don't care if it's a SharePoint site, a Confluence page, a website, a folder on the network. Just make sure there's some security on it. You review the information from as many sources as possible. Here are a lot of suggestions. Do you have any business analyst peers that work? Do you have any project managers or team members from other projects they worked on? Are there friends and allies? Are there? This is where the acquaintance could be a big help. They may not have the power or the direct impact on the project, but they can help you figure out who's might get impacted and what their likely attitude might be. Interview the priority stakeholder. And then, as I said, use a shared repository, but think formal and informal and structured and unstructured, because you want to have all the information you can as you slot them, because you want to be thoughtful about this. Where do they go? And then be careful about the politics around the data. And as you are thinking about a person, make sure you put yourself in their shoes. What's their reality? Do you see a chalice or a candlestick? I guess it could be either way. Or do you see two silhouettes? Which do you guys see? My first thing my eyes go to the white. So I see the chalice. Some people are going to see the black first, and they're going to see the two silhouettes. Somebody's reality, even though you're looking at the same thing, may be different, because an example would be when I was working at a company called the Minnesota Workers' Comp Insurance Association. We were working on a project to digitize all the data that we were using. It was a great project, could have saved the organization a ton of money, make things so much faster. Yet, so that's why all the good things most folks like, yet we were going to put 20 people out of jobs. So if you were the person on the project, you're the one working on it, you were the beneficiary of the project, it was awesome. Yet looking at the same project, those 20 people say, I'm going to lose my job. So their reality is different. So one of the things you have to keep in mind as you're doing stakeholder analysis is, as Julie Kowalski was talking about, you have to have the EQ to recognize people are different. You might have a bias. This is great because this is a project you're working on, but you still have to put yourself in the other people's shoes. Is this going to be great for everybody? Or is it going to be an impact? Is there going to be a training required? Someone's going to have to do more work. And then there's the other, some people see things differently because they can't see the same thing. I love this joke. Do you think it goes above the surface? As a fisher talking about the rainbow. In their world, they can only see below the water. And above the water, we can only see what's above the water. And the situation I used, or example I used for this, is if you've got leaders that think this project's the next thing, best thing since sliced bread, this is a great idea, it's going to fit our strategy, it'll be great long term. Yet the folks that are in the trenches see a different world. It's going to make my life miserable. I'm going to have to do something that's not what I want to do. It's going to be a lot more work. Again, they don't see the same thing because of where they're sitting. But you have to realize the reality for both parties. The senior executive that thinks this is a great strategy, and the individuals that have to deliver on that strategy may have different realities. So make sure you understand that people have different realities as you're identifying them and slotting them. So Wikipedia says things that they actually are. So my definition is reality is the state of things that each individual believes actually exist. For those of you that are detail oriented and say, no, there's only number one is always one. There's no such thing as, one can't be two different things. 1 + 1 is always equal to 2. Well, 1 + 1 may be equal to 2, but is 2 a good thing or not? It's very relative depending upon, where you are. Are you the one doing the work, having fun on the project, or are you the one being impacted? So keep in mind, reality is the state of things each individual believes actually exists. And a lot of different reasons, their experiences, their personality types. I do a lot of presentations on personality types. you know, if you're a detail-oriented type and you don't like change, or maybe your job is to keep things steady and repeatable, and you're coming across and someone's upsetting the apple cart, what are you going to do? Can anybody think of areas that don't like change because their goals are different? An example would be if you have somebody that's in operations, IT operations. Their job is to keep the process running. What happens when you install a new application? Invariably, there's a hiccup. Something goes wrong. Their goal is to keep things running smooth. You coming in and you're changing something which is going to cause hiccups intermittently as things get worked out. You have conflicting goals, so keep that in mind. If you're security, their goal is to make sure something's locked down tight, and your application introduces something new that could cause problems. Different communication and learning styles. So just keep in mind, different realities are there for a reason, and you have to be prepared to deal with it. It's the basis for their attitude and their interests. Make sure you understand their reality, because it's the basis for their attitude and their interests. So next thing you do is you rate the stakeholders. So make a comparison, highlight the most significant information. Create a stakeholder table. My handout will have a sample table you can use. You can copy it out if anybody's interested. I have a template that you can. I'd be willing to share via email if you're interested. But take that table information and start putting people on it. Rate them along the three axes. Rate them 1 to 3. 1's negative, 3 is positive, 2 is in the middle. Keep in mind, their interest and attitude will change over time. So at this point in time, as you're doing it, it could change over time. Remember, power is the ability to affect the process, not just the location on the org chart. And this allows the project team. I mean, the purpose for doing this is to allow the team to develop a clear comparison amongst the stakeholders. Any questions? Does this make sense? Then after that, you have to figure out how you want to use the information. So you're going to conclude and lock everybody in, but how are you going to use the information? First of all, you can find out, who's the important people to deal with. I suggest it's the ones that have a higher level of power. Who has the knowledge of what's going on? Who's got the same alliances? Who's got the same sort of thought? And then you develop an action plan to increase their support for the project. You want to involve or influence them. What is your communication plan? How do you communicate with them to get them on board? How do you make sure it's clear what's in it for them? Are you going to ask them to help with a prototype? Or are you going to ask them to participate in a presentation at senior management? Are you going to ask them to help be part of the requirements gathering or design work? Whatever it is, get them involved, get them influenced. I like this quote from Ben Franklin: "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I may learn." So the best way I find for getting people to increase support for a project is to involve them. And then create risk mitigation plans around people that have negative attitudes, especially focusing on those with more power. And then a communication plan for all groups and all stakeholders. And by that, I mean the ones that are no interest, you might just put them on a monthly update or a quarterly update. The ones that have a high lot of influence, they may get not only that quarterly update, but they may also get one-on-one conversations. They may also get hallway conversations. They may also get involved to staff meetings. If they've got enough power, you have to figure out how you want to get them communicated and coordinated all on the same side. And then customize it. Get some consensus from the team. You're the business analyst. You might have a tech designer. You might have a PM. You may have your sponsor. You may have your lead SME. All the folks that are already bought in, get them together, build a consensus, and then develop your go-forward process. And then, as I mentioned, along the way, focus on the people or groups with the power first. They're the ones that you're gonna have the most impact, and you wanna get them to be on the positive attitude axis. All right, a good analysis allows you to identify stakeholders across the enterprise, which in turn help create strategies to develop stakeholder support and to devise ways to mitigate project risk and proactively overcome obstacles for successful completion, which often includes an organizational change management. That's my long-winded way. Now, what we're talking about here when you're dealing with folks downstream, saboteurs, time bombs, irritants, is a lot of times you need an organizational change management or OCM effort, because you can do it if it's a small project, you know, think a couple hundred hours, 10 people. You don't need a big organized effort, but the bigger, the more complex, the more far-reaching the effort, the more important an OCM effort is. If anybody wants to talk to me about how to do OCM, I'd be happy to do a conversation on organizational or culture change management, because that is the key for large, messy, sticky projects. All right, so what you consider influence you have over each stakeholder. If someone is an irritant or a time bomb or a saboteur, but you have a good rapport with them, if you've got good relationship, you've got a high level of trust, you've got some currency you can use to go and convince them otherwise. So one of the things you can do all along, even today, even before they're on your project, even before you know if they're involved, is always build relationships with anybody and everybody, because that's the currency you have to convince them to be an ally on your project. All right, some spear hints. Authority versus power. Everybody know what authority is. That's where they are in the org chart. They have the right to exercise power. Versus power, they have the might. Anybody put into the chat people they have that are not in authority, because everybody knows the org chart, but who are some examples of people that have power that don't necessarily have the authority? In your world, you don't name Johnny or Susie or Jimmy or whatever, but what are some roles that have an unusual amount of power, even though they have no organizational power? I like Glenn, admin assistant, power users, absolutely. Day-to-day project owner, co-workers with specific skill sets, absolutely, absolutely. People with the knowledge about the process, absolutely. All these folks, you might think about and put on your stakeholder chart, but also think about the people that are going to regulators. Whether if you're building I mean, those in non-IT, but those in construction, if you have someone that has to inspect it, it has to go through deployment, your CAB. If something has to go through a security risk assessment, something has to be approved by HR. These people aren't necessarily in your normal project, but they have power. They can influence the outcome because they can stop, slow down, or hinder or change direction of your project. So think broad. Think of not just the authority, but who has the power. Company I work for, there are Michael, Dave, and Tom. One is a DevOps, one is a developer, and one works in the database area. If they say jump, everybody says how high. They are individual contributors, no level of management, but everybody recognizes them for their experience and their expertise and their thoroughness around understanding our environment, so that if Tom says this project will work, everybody else listens. So when you're thinking about power, think about those subject matter experts that have specific skill sets, specific expertise. And one hint to figure out who that is, if you're sitting in a room, which God help us, my company's going back live in person May 8th, but you can sit around a room, right? And you can see people's reactions. So when Dave or Tom or Michael say something, everybody shakes their head yes. Then you can observe that. That's one of the reasons why I ask people to unmute videos when I'm in a work meeting. I ask everybody, God knows techies hate doing that, but I ask them and I condole and I bribe and I plead for people to get off, because when I hear Bill Lou say, hey, this is a good idea, and everybody else shakes their head yes, I see that. I see the influence. I see where that power is. All right. Anybody have any hints on how to determine who some of the stakeholders are with authority. Toss that in the chat if you would. Anybody have a hint on how you can see what the authority is? And then as you're thinking about that, how do you have any hints on how do you determine who has the power? Who controls the budget? I love that, Catherine. Absolutely. Who has the budget, holds the purse strings. Where are some other ways? Sponsors. Yep, sponsors have authority. They sign off on charters. They can make decisions. They often have staff report to them. How about some unusual power players that I haven't mentioned yet? Anybody have any think of any of their organization? Project owner? Yep. You're going to think about it in an agile world. It might be the product manager. Security. Yes, Glenn, I agree with that. When questions are asked, I follow people the stakeholders go to for answers. Absolutely. Find out who everybody else goes to and keep track of that. Absolutely. Subject matter experts, SMEs with critical knowledge. How do you, I agree with you, Deb, wholeheartedly. How do you know who they are? How do you find out who they are? Paul's back. Hi, Paul. So what you need to do when you do the stakeholder analysis is you cast a wide net, use multiple people to help analyze their power and their authority and where they go on the chart. Who's respected by the team? Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So another one. What typical roles fall into the time bomb sphere? Can anybody think of it? My example earlier was the manager, there was a staff manager over those 20 people we were laying off. That person was losing two-thirds of her staff. She was not involved in the project because we were automating it, but it had a huge impact downstream. Think about the projects you've worked on. Who are some of the roles or some of the situations where somebody was a saboteur or a time bomb? Can anything come to mind? Anybody want to think of any personality types that fall into that sphere? Folks that like steady, repeatable tend to not like change. So if you're a DISC personality, if you're into DISC personality, D-I-S-C, the S's are the steady, repeatable. They don't like change. They tend to not be happy. They want things to stay the way they are. Somebody who's got goals to keep things up and running. Absolutely. Anybody, any kind of incumbent vendor. I love that, Debbie. Yep, absolutely. People that like to have control, accounting. Absolutely. All those are true. You have to think about that. What's in it for them when something's changing? What's the impact to them? Absolutely. And you have to, the more empathetic, the more understanding you can be about their role, their personality type, the better off you can figure out who typically falls there. But be careful when you typically put somebody there, that person still might not fit in the right slot because of something else. Maybe they see the big picture. Maybe they are losing their job, but they're okay with that. They'll go find another job anywhere. It's just the right thing for the company. So go in with your assumptions and then validate them. And then Mackenzie says people who may have been in the role for a long time. Yep, absolutely. It's always been this way. Absolutely. They're steady, repeatable people. They don't want to change. So how do you address each situation using influence, involve, ignore, and isolate? If you've got a senior person who's got a lot of power or an SME that's got a lot of power, you have to use influence and involve. Get them involved. When Julie was saying, someone says that can't happen, and she said, well, what can happen? And asked 3 times. It's the same thing. Get them involved. Ask them why they have that concern. Put your bodysuit of armor on, and then ask them questions. Do not judge them. Do not criticize them. Because what happens is if you harshly judge them, they're going to go silent. So find out what their concerns are. And then either A, they're right, in which case you adapt your process and your project and go forward, or they're wrong and you explain to them why and influence their decision. Or say, hey, if that's your problem, that's your concern, why don't you join the team? Help us do it right. I like this quote: a pessimist sees a difficulty in every opportunity. Your job is to turn that pessimist into an optimist who sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So if someone says this can't work, or this is a problem, or this is not right, this is going to hurt things downstream, they're a pessimist. Get them to be an optimist. All right, a couple of things about tendencies, some general hints. They tend to want facts. So when you're running a project with, they will ask for updates and status reports. So senior management, make sure you have your, I don't know if it's Confluence page or PowerPoint deck or one-on-one meeting or group meeting, but make sure managers tend to be saviors, so they tend to have a lot of power, or they're a sleeping giant. Make sure you have regular status updates. The managers have the power, take good care of them. They also have a great deal of concern about the project's impact on their reputation in the future. You're the project person, you're coming in, you, the PM, the developer, are going to come in and make this great application, and then you're going to walk on to your next project, aren't you? And they're going to be stuck with the outcome. And hopefully the project's impact is positive and going to help them do a better job. So they want to know what the drawbacks and the downsides are, and then how are you going to handle those? And again, risk management. And keep in mind, managers hate surprises. I've never seen a manager that likes a surprise, right? So get in front of everything, communicate, let them know what's going on. Even if something has a little bump in the road, do not let them get surprised. Make sure they know about it. Steady, repeatable, confident, customized communication. And then different facets are under their command. So make sure their tendency is to make resources available to you, right? So if they're happy, they're on the right side, they're a savior, if you need something, they're there. The other thing is, if you've got a savior that's on your side, they're the ones that I go to help convince other executives and senior state shareholders to buy in. They speak the same language, they understand better maybe than I might what their concerns and so on are. So getting an executive or a third party to help with that process is always a good idea. But remember, not every manager with the same degree of enthusiasm. But in the end, what should their final attitude be? Before you deploy, you want everybody to be positive. You don't want them sabotaging you at the time of deployment. If they got a negative attitude at the beginning of the project, that's one thing. But you're working towards throughout the project to get their attitude to change to positive by influencing and involving them. Keep in mind the team's tendencies. They're part of the 20% who likes change. They get excited. They love it. Maybe they get bored in the middle of the project because it's long, but they're going to be happy because it's, hey, we're involved. We're the ones that are causing the change. I believe I heard Julie say that it's fun because I'm causing the change. And if you're the IT person that's creating the new project and creating the application, you're thrilled about it. But what happens if somebody's coming in and says, hey, we're going to change your methodology. We're going to change your tool set. We're going to change the way you do business. Now you're part of the 80% that's getting impacted. So keep in mind that sometimes you're the one doing the change, but every once in a while someone's doing change to you. So you could be at either side of the coin. So not everybody will have a huge degree of excitement, but they should all be positive. The quality of their work will impact the outcome, right? I mean, that's kind of like a duh statement. So you got to make sure the team is on your side, the team's working hard, they're cooperating, and their attitude better be positive. Customers, and when I say customers, I mean internal or external. They don't know exactly what they want or what they need. And that's what you're here for, right? Aren't you there to interview them, find out what their issues are, gather information? They don't know what they want. They don't know what, they only know what they've always done. But in the end, they want a good value. They don't think about triple constraints. They don't think about time, features, and cost. They just want all the features. They don't care what it costs. They want it right now. They don't care how long it's supposed to take. They also will react according to the track record of the project team. If the team has done a great job delivering, they'll have a positive attitude. If there's been negative impact along the way, they may have a negative attitude. And they are the 80%. So the 20% is the ones that are creating, the 80% are the ones that are impacted. And they don't necessarily like the changes. They've always done it this way. So some of their concerns might be the level of understanding the problem they're solving. Maybe they think everything's just fine, but upper management sees a problem because supply chains are changing, or methods are changing, or org structure are changing, and hey, we need to change with it. So keep in mind, customers could be external or internal. There should be an organized, sustained effort for their ongoing support, because they tend to be the acquaintances, right? Or the tripwires, depending upon their attitude, but you still have to keep them in the loop what's going on. Their customer satisfaction after you deploy is, in my mind, is the measure of success for your project. So in the end, what should their final attitude be? It should be positive. This should be, oh, this is a neat little outcome. Thank you. This project was great. I lost my eye off the chats here. Highly processed and oriented people. I'm not exactly sure what highly processed is, because I'll be out of context what I'm talking now. So help me understand what that is. And then Mackenzie, people may have been in the role a long time. Yep, it's always been this way. All right. So also keep in mind Big Brother. I call him Big Brother, but that's any regulatory or oversight body, right? They love transparency. They don't want surprises. They're conservative and careful. We avoid risks at all costs. They have a predefined set of rules to follow. They are rule followers. We follow these rules. Me, I'm a little bit of a rule, makes sense, more like a guideline kind of guy. So I drive those folks nuts. But they don't like exceptions. They don't like changes. They don't like surprises. So those are the folks you work ahead of time before they have a chance to impact. You know, if I'm going to have to go to the change control board in a month, work with them, find out what they're concerned about your project. Before I need approval or risk, assessment, start at the beginning. Hey, can you join the team? Can you be involved right away? Involving them. I want to make sure that when we roll this project out, it's secure and everything works. Can you be involved in part of the team? Now, again, they can be internal or external. It should be an organized effort to make sure there's support and approval ahead of time. And they are often final approval before go live. You can't deploy that if the cab doesn't say, if the control board doesn't say so. So make sure they're on board. In the end, their attitude better be positive. It can't even be neutral. It's going to have to be positive. So, a couple slides left. Remember that no two groups are alike. Be careful about bias. Julie talked about that. Be careful about your bias, your group's bias as you're talking through the people. People change in different situations, sometimes under stress or relaxed, sometimes as a group or one-on-one, formal, informal, or if they're driving the change or having it thrust upon them. So when you think about it, figure out where they are as you're talking through with your partners, figure out where they are and depending upon what situation they're in. Don't forget the unusual or far downstream stakeholders. And when going, and also keep in mind ongoing maintenance. You created this stakeholder chart, you've got it taken care of, everybody's there, you've got a plan. But what happens if you have a new hire? What happens if you've added some people because of scope change? What happens if there's a change in sponsor or an executive or a subject matter expert? As I mentioned earlier, keep in mind approaching gatekeeper reviews, and then keep really in mind when you're rolling it out to the enterprise, because the 80% are now going to be impacted. So over time, don't just put it on the shelf. Make sure you every once in a while dust it off and see if are there any changes in the people or their position on the chart. And then what you do is do some more research, re-rate them, update your chart. All right, I'm on my last slide here. So in summary, not everybody benefits from the outcome of your project. Not everyone thinks and acts the same. So you have to be empathetic. You have to adapt. You have to have a high EQ. Power is not just the people who have the right. Keep in mind, it's the one that has the might. So you want to gain as many converts as early as possible. Change those sleeping giants to saviors. Change those time bombs to sleeping giants or saviors. Organizational change management is about helping the other 80% adapt. If you only remember 3 things, help them own the idea. If it's their idea, it's how they do it. If they're involved, they're already bought in. They have a positive attitude. But if they haven't bought, if they're not their own idea, remind them what's in it for them. I like to say, because I used to be a sales guy back in the day, sell early, sell often, sell everyone. ABC stands for always be closing, by doing what's in it for them. And use the I4 model, influence involved. And only if required, only if absolutely necessary, ignore and isolate. I think what I should have done is I should have put the, as I'm talking about, what happened to my slate, my chart. Well, my chart's not in my deck. So any questions on the presentation? If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask on any area within the presentation and the impact.
Oh, this is Mike. Something I really appreciated was you talking about a person may not have authority, but they have influence over those with authority. So important to take care of all of our stakeholders.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't forget some of the people that don't show up on the org chart might have the most influence. Here's a stakeholder management form. I'm surprised I don't have on the deck, but if anybody's interested in getting it, just nothing magical, but it has a name, organization they belong to, because remember, they might come out, they might be from outside your company. Oops, what happened? What happened? Lost my stakeholder. We're having all sorts of fun with technical today. They may be outside the organization, or they may be in a different department. What their role, and then you rate them 1 to 3 on power, interest, and attitude, and then track some unique facts that might impact or might prove worth knowing, and then determine. Good grief, I click on it and I go nowhere. And then identify ways to manage. Is it, how are you going to influence them? How are you going to involve them? And then attach the label, savior, time bomb, tripwire, acquaintance. How would you restate what I4 stands for again? Well, I4 stands for involve, influence, isolate, or ignore. So the first 2 are how do you get them to be positive attitude? So if they're negative or neutral attitude, how do you get their attitude from that state to positive? So you involve them and influence them to get a positive attitude. If you can't get them to have a positive attitude, how do you ignore or isolate them? By that I mean they have no power, no right, they don't care. They think the project's the worst thing they've ever heard of, but you know what? I don't give a crap. It doesn't impact me. Well, you just ignore them. Or if they're out there politicking against your project, they still have no power. How do you isolate that concern? So I4 stands for the 4 ways to get them to be successful at involving and isolating, which means they come to the positive, or making sure their negative attitude doesn't impact. Catherine says, you have given food for thought on whether there should be a side project about people whose jobs will change to help them see what they can do next. Yep, absolutely. Organizational change management. It's one of the, the bigger, the messier, the more impact for the organization, the more important OCM, culture change management, is. But you have to think about that. You're having fun running this great project, it's going to have a good outcome, but it's going to change people's lives downstream. And how do you get them to buy in? It should be an organized effort. Some people make a living out of nothing but how do you manage organizational change? My world, it's part of everything I do, but I'm not an OCM expert. I'm more of a jack of all trades that is familiar with how to do OCM. Any other questions? Anybody else want to unmute and ask a question? I think we've got time for one more. If not, anybody, I know the deck is in the upload. I can add any of my Tyler, I think it was Tyler that said, here's a little poster I have. Include or influence, ignore or isolate. Anybody wants any of my artifacts, my little cheat sheet grid, this, a copy of the deck, let me know. More than happy to share anything I have. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Michael.
Thanks, Joe. Really, really appreciate your presentation today. I know I find it very, very helpful, and I will use several of those tips. So our speaker today, Joe Perzel, want to thank you for sharing your expertise so we can learn new and innovative ideas.